Hey there, everybody. Coach Mark here. And before we dive into today's topic, make sure to find me over on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrabio. Also, I offer one-to-one coaching. It's what I do full time, and the odds are very good I'd love to work with you. But with that being said, let's get into it. So it's no secret that I'm a fan of 3 times a week training, especially if your schedule is something like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Being able to hit full body 3 times a week is just a good, flexible split. It makes a lot of sense for the vast majority of us. Honestly, it's one of my default options. However, if your schedule is something more like Monday, Thursday, Friday, now we have a bit of a complication here because we have to accommodate for consecutive sessions. And back-to-back full body programming can get really complicated really quickly. And that's where I'm going to reach for the FLU split. And that's full, lower, upper. Obviously, you can switch the order around based off of what you need to get done in your training week and your availability. However, calling it the ULT split doesn't sound quite as catchy, so that's why we're going with the FLU. Now, aside from the obvious schedule compatibility win with this approach, there's a couple other things worth considering. One thing I really like is the ability to have dedicated days for both lower and upper body intensive sessions. These are going to be your sessions, obviously, where you're straining a bit more, you're going a bit heavier. And then you have that third session of the week be your full body, more developmental oriented session where you're doing speed work, you're doing pause work, you're focusing more on technique. Because what I find is with those heavier days, you need to be in a more agitated mental state. You've got to get that adrenaline in your soul to keep the fight from getting out of control. Whereas when you're moving into a speed or tech session, it's more of a flow state, low arousal but high focus. So this allows you to sort of compartmentalize every single day and really focus on its necessary function in terms of maximizing what it is you're trying to get done that day. So in terms of practical application, let's start off with what a strongman off-season block might look like with the FLU split. So the focus here is overall rep strength, and the exercises are organized as such that we're going to minimize carryover fatigue and maximize our ability to chase overload meaningfully in every single session. So day one is our full body developmental day where we're going to start with a 40-degree incline press and a high bar pause squat. Now we're opting for these two variations to start the week off as they're both great accessory movements that feed into our primary movements. The 40-degree incline is one of the most reliable overhead press strength builders you can do, but it also doesn't generate a lot of low back fatigue, and it really helps target the delts triceps. Whereas the high bar pause squat is going to build the torso and leg strength you need not only for a stronger deadlift, but to help you with your moving events as well as loading events as well, just due to all that hip and leg strength you're going to develop from it. Additionally, it also forces you to use a slightly lower load, so it generates less nervous system fatigue. And then after that, we just have a few accessories. But again, if you look at the accessories we're opting for, there's not a lot of low back fatigue being generated, which is something we want to be really mindful of because day two is our deadlift primary session. Now for day two, we're starting the session off with a stiff leg deadlift. This is a really great variation for the strongman athlete to push either in the off season as a main lift or as a supplemental exercise. And the reason why is the higher hip position of a stiff leg deadlift is not only going to improve your pull in the mid range, but it's also going to help you with your pick of something like a sandbag or a stone coming off the floor, which often requires a higher hip position. And then after that, we're going to move into what I call an FO, which is a fat neutral grip row, which again, incredible for improving your loading events because it helps with your pick off the ground, which we're then going to move into some carries with a sandbag thereafter, followed it up with some back extension and hamstring curls. And then we're specifically ending the session with something known as an inverse squat. And the reason why, that inverse squat movement, if you're not familiar with it, that's where you're going to get a cable stack or a band, put your feet in it, and essentially lay on your back and tuck your knees into your chest. Not only does it strengthen the lower abdominals, but it also strengthens the hip flexors, which helps with foot speed on moving events, as well as decompresses the low back, which is going to give us a nice little bit of passive recovery moving into our third session of the week, which is the upper body intensive session. Now, as you can see here, we're starting upper body intensive, and the strict log is the first movement of the day. This is just one of those movements that all around is really great for a strongman athlete. Especially on the log, it benefits more from strict pressing strength than any other implement because the log itself has such an inherently awkward rack position, and you don't get as much leg drive on it as you would, say, the axle. But then after we do some strict pressing, I still think it's important to do a little bit of push pressing. You should always have some push pressing in your training cycle as a strongman athlete just to stay ahead of skill decay. It doesn't even have to be that much volume. Just a few triples at 70% will help you keep from getting rusty. But then after that, you can see we just finished the day off with some supplemental movements there to help round out upper body development, as this is an off-season mass gain oriented protocol. Now you'll see that there actually aren't any set or rep schemes here. Quite honestly, if you go through this channel, there are tons of options available, but when in doubt, for your developmental movements, just think about positioning and technique, probably the 3 to 5 range, and then your intensive can be anywhere from 3 to 8 rep maxes, depending on what it is you're chasing. With something like this, probably more in the 5 to 8 rep max range, but like I said, I got tons of resources available on the channel for that. Otherwise, you could always just consider hiring me, and I do offer one-to-one coaching. Hit the link down below, and we can get that going. But now that we're done with our sponsored content, let's move into the power building split. Right, so for our power building split, you'll see that we open the week a little bit differently. We're actually going to be starting with sort of a back and shoulders day. And the reason why for this is I find that the rear delts get a good bit of work when you are doing sufficient pulling volume. So we'll begin with the 70-degree dumbbell incline, which is a fantastic shoulder developer. You could also do this off of a Smith machine. You could do this with a barbell, whatever you like, honestly. Then we move into a snatch grip RDL, some chin-ups, the adductor machine, which having strong adductors is very important for a good stable squat. And especially when you are doing high rep squats, these often get neglected. Then some easy bar curls, tricep press downs. A very standard day of training in my opinion. Now for the lower intensive day, this is essentially a proxy for a leg day in almost a quasi bro split approach. We're actually going to start the day off with hamstring curls. That's a little trick I stole from John Meadows. Rest in peace, by the way. But what it does is just getting the hamstrings pumped and warm before your squats often helps with stability and control. We're opting for the SSB squat just because it's a great variation. Then we'll move into some SSB good mornings. And what's nice about that SSB good morning is we did shoulder press earlier in the week, and then our next session is bench press. This is going to keep the shoulders from getting tight. This is a very comfortable position versus doing it with a barbell, which could be a little more draining. Then we'll top off with some leg press, calf raises on the leg press since you're already there, and then knee extensions to finish the day off. Again, nothing particularly complicated. And then last but certainly not least is our upper intensive day, and this is the day that we're actually going to bench. You got to bench. And some of you might be wondering why we don't have the bench first. Well, everyone tends to bench on Monday. Also, I found personally it's better to do your shoulder pressing earlier in the week before benching, because if you bench before your shoulder press, the pecs get a little bit tight, which can really impact your range of motion and quality of movement with your overhead pressing. Whereas the other way around, I find that very much is not the case. But then after the bench, we're going to move into a dumbbell incline, some flies, upright rows, hammer curls, and skull crushers. Again, just a good, well-rounded split, and the entire idea here is the days feed into one another without creating too much overlapping fatigue, especially in the low back and shoulders. Now, our final sample program is actually going to be built around a strongman competition, and that is Louisiana's Strongest Man, which, as we're recording this video, is happening right now. So if you happen to have competed at that show and you're watching this after the fact, I apologize that I wasn't there to help you. I'll be candid, when I was making this video, I just went to Iron Podium, found a show, and this was the one, and I'll be honest, the event selection for this is, well, it's a choice. The events are a Max Circus dumbbell, which incidentally is also showing up at Strongman Corp Nationals, an 18-inch max deadlift with suits allowed, a sandbag carry to sled drag, a Hercules hold, and then a stone over bar series. So for our first event, we have the circus dumbbell, which is an abjectly awful decision when it comes to an event, and then doing it for a max makes it, well, even worse, but that's all I'm going to say for now. So as such, our full body day, we're going to start with the circus dumbbell, but we would want to do this one more focusing on pause and rack position skill, making sure that we're not bottlenecking ourselves very quickly. Because when it comes to circus dumbbell, it's rarely your raw strength that's going to be the issue. It's going to be a skill bottleneck. So a little higher frequency, especially in show prep, is going to be very important on this implement. After the circus dumbbell, we'll do some paused front squats, which are great for upper back and leg strength that carries over to loading and moving events. And then we're going to do some barbell rows, but if you'll notice, we're actually doing them from an elevated position. Because you have an elevated deadlift in this show, we want to mimic that with the row to get maximum transference. Then we're going to do some stone loading here, and the row helps prime us for that. Then we'll top off with some easy bar curls and inverse squat, just for elbow health as well as to decompress the low back before we move into our second day, which is our deadlift-focused session. Second day obviously starts with our 18-inch deadlift, just building limit strength there, before moving into some sandbag and sled training. And depending on the athlete, we'd probably do some density work for the first few weeks, maybe do heart shocks. All really depends on how far out we were from the show. Again, we're just looking at overall splits right now, rather than diving into the nitty-gritty of the individual programs. Then after that, we do some split squats, hamstring curls, ab wheel, and side bends, all very good standard supplemental movements to improve torso and leg strength for transference to these events. Day 3 brings us, unfortunately, back to the circus dumbbell because, well, we have to train this horrible event for this show. And then after the circus dumbbell, we're going to do the Hercules hold. Now, I opted to put the Hercules hold on the upper body day rather than the lower body day, specifically because the circus dumbbell itself does tend to have a fat handle, and we don't want the grip fried moving into circus dumbbell training for this show. Whereas if we do the circus dumbbell first, it's not going to generate that much grip fatigue for the Hercules hold, and it more closely emulates the demands of the show in terms of event order. Then after getting those two events taken care of, we move into some single arm work, and this is going to be really good for helping sort of hedge against the imbalances that you will receive training a circus dumbbell for the show. Zydrunas Savickas himself said that when it comes to training the circus dumbbell, if you are peaking for a competition, it is not worth the time and energy to train the offhand. So instead, what I would suggest is when doing your one arm work, such as this dumbbell bench press, add an extra set or two for the non-competition arm. And then after that, we're going to do some reverse curls, again, for the elbow and forearm health because your grip is getting worked quite a bit. And then windmills. Windmills are one of those good all-around mobility and stability exercises. I think the windmill is probably the most underrated movement you can do as a strongman athlete, because it's going to carry over to your circus dumbbell. It's going to help improve your overall mobility and stability, which means if you have something like a yoke carry, you'll be able to get it back under control in the event it gets away from you. And then some Powell raises just for shoulder health. So again, you can see how this split covers all of the necessary event training, and we do our very best to reduce transference of fatigue across the sessions. So that really wraps everything up today. So as you can see, we have 3 different ways to apply this 3 times a week conjugate using the FLU split. Let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. Otherwise, I'll see you folks in the next video. Take care, everyone.